Greetings, metaphysicians. This is episode 144, Death to the Ego. And that's what we're talking about. The topic of ego death actually came up a few times in the last few days for me, which is a pretty out there topic to just come up in general conversation. So knew we needed to do an episode on it. And I hope you enjoy.
You're listening to Let's Get Metaphysical. This podcast explores the spiritual and metaphysical world through the experiences and opinions of the host and those interviewed. It should not necessarily be seen as direct endorsement or personal advice to our listeners. We encourage you to use your own discernment, judgment, and intuition regarding anything you learn from this show.
Let's get meta.
Welcome to the Let's Get Metaphysical podcast. I'm your host, Renata Maniaci, here to remind you that you are a spiritual being having a temporary human experience here on lovely planet Earth. Make the most of it. This is Season 7, Heaven on Earth, and this is episode 144, Death to the Ego. And before I get into this topic, I just want to give a shout out to all the amazing people that I've met while on my trip to New Zealand, who I've had just the most incredible, deep, unexpectedly spiritual and divine conversations with. It is really amazing just how easy it can be to have these mind-blowing conversations with people of all ages, all nationalities. I've been blown away by the people I've been meeting. On the one hand, I'm blown away. On the other hand, it's perfectly divinely guided and normal for me to be meeting these people and having these amazing conversations. And I'm sure that can happen anywhere and not just while traveling, but it seems particularly heightened when it's somebody that you don't know, just complete strangers, and having just incredibly deep, meaningful conversations and connections. And this episode was inspired by two of those conversations that happened within 2 days of each other with completely different people, completely different everything, ages, genders, nationalities, everything. And both of these people brought up the concept of ego death. And this is a concept that I've pondered significantly the last few years, as it's been an ongoing occurrence and process for me, death of the ego. And I'm going to get into that in the episode, but I just wanted to pay tribute to these folks who brought up this concept and inspired this episode. So thank you to Anna and thank you to Jeff. So without further ado, let's jump right in. Are you ready? Let's get meta. Masters and angels, I request your presence, guidance, and support through this episode. Please help these words to be useful to all listeners on their evolutionary journeys. Let me know the truth, speak the truth, become the truth, and be the truth. And please let this episode reach whoever needs to hear it. Thank you with gratitude and full faith. Bless creation. Now, as usual, I am no expert on this topic of ego death, but it has come up enough times in the past few days that it is clear that this is what I was to do my next episode about. So let's get into that. What does that mean? What does the death of the ego or ego death mean? What's come up in conversation are a few examples, and we're going to talk about a few examples of what this can look like, what this is. And essentially, it's the idea of your ego being destroyed. Whatever personality you have built up in this lifetime that is specific to this lifetime, to this body, to this set of abilities, to this level of intelligence that you carry with you. That is the ego of this moment on your soul's journey. The ego of this incarnation, the ego of this body, this person, this human. And I want to be clear, I'm not saying that there's necessarily anything wrong with that, with your ego in this lifetime. But it seems to be a prop for your incarnation that is specific to this one incarnation. As we have different lifetimes, different bodies, different places, different abilities, different everything, it changes. Your ego will change depending on all of these different factors and depending on how you are built up or built down in this or any lifetime. That ego will change. And to be honest, who knows if there is such a thing as an ego on other planets? Maybe you've had different experiences where ego is not a part of the package. It's not a part of the incarnational package of that lifetime. Maybe you were something other than human, and that type of being did not have an ego. For example, do dogs have an ego? Do cats have an ego? Do animals on this planet have an ego? I don't know the answer to that, but it's just something to think about, that if you were not incarnated in human form to begin with in other lifetimes, that might just mean that you had a lifetime without an ego. Or maybe you were on a different planet where having an ego was not necessary. So you were a human being or some kind of humanoid without an ego because that was not necessary to that experience. You see where I'm going with this. It's just that you could have had many hundreds of thousands of millions of experiences that may or may not have included an ego. But for what we're talking about here in this episode, we do have egos. If you're listening to this, you probably are human and probably are having an incarnation on this planet at this time, and you have an ego based on your experiences thus far, whatever you came in with and whatever has happened in your life to get you to where you are right now. And that includes ego about your looks, your capabilities, your weaknesses, your profession, your intelligence, your physical capabilities, your prowess in certain areas, all kinds of things. And I'm sure I'm missing a lot as well. But what I'm getting at is it is this constructed thing that is part and parcel to this human vehicle that you're currently inhabiting. And what I'm getting at is that this ego is very much tied to this body and this incarnation and this set of capabilities that you currently have, and is not, in fact, tied to your soul. When you drop this body and move back into inhabiting or being that full measure of your soul, you will not have this ego that is your current costume for this lifetime. But then we get to this concept, and I would say it's a fairly spiritual concept of ego death. And what do we mean by that? The way it came up in conversation over the past few days is that these folks that I was talking to brought up that they've had experiences or seen other people have experiences of ego death. And what can that look like? What is that? That is parts of your ego literally dying or being destroyed. And for the purposes of this episode, we see this as a good thing. We see this as an evolutionary thing, as something that can move you forward and further along the path towards becoming more of your soul and less of your humanly constructed personality. There's not only one way for ego death to happen, but a few that seem prevalent and prominent when this has been discussed is some form of humiliation happening for you in a certain area of your life concerning a very specific thing that maybe you had or have or had ego about. So one example of this that was shared with me by one of these folks is ego death around your body, having something embarrassing happen that maybe tens or hundreds or thousands of people have seen you do. And if that happens, that shatters that part of you that had ego about this aspect of yourself, maybe your body. This can also happen in any form of intellectual arena, right? Maybe you are an expert, a human expert at some human subject, and you get bested by someone else in public, or publicly embarrassed or humiliated because you answered something incorrectly, for example. And that part, a part of that intellectual ego, dies, is destroyed. It's just destroyed right there. And there's example upon example, and maybe right now you're actually remembering a time where you had some form of ego death, some form of destruction to a part of your humanly constructed ego. Maybe it was an athletic endeavor. You were the top or really good at some form of sport or game, and you were bested by somebody else or a different team, or otherwise just somehow in a situation where that part of you that had ego about this sport or this game or this thing was destroyed because of a particular situation. And again, there's so many different types of ego. It's not that the death of the ego can happen or does happen all at once, the destruction of your full ego. And maybe it does. I'm sure it does in some cases because everything seems to exist on some level. So I'm sure that there are different situations where a complete destruction of a human ego has happened at one time or one moment or because of one experience. But if that's not the extreme that you're used to, maybe you're thinking now, you're remembering various situations in your life where this might apply to you, where you may have lost some ego that you had about something. You maybe were the best dancer, and then another dancer came along and was better than you, and there was part of that dance ego that got destroyed, etc., etc., etc. So you can really talk about anything. And this can happen at any stage, and I think it does happen at various stages of our lives. I think it probably happens a lot when we're young, when our egos are just being built up at that point, right? When we're kids and learning how to speak and walk and run and do sports and make friends and go to school and learn languages and all of this stuff. There's all of this opportunity to create, and indeed you do create your ego and personality for this lifetime. But as you figure out what you're good at and what you're not, you create different forms. Some people's intelligence ego is bigger than others. For example, some people's athletic ego is different than others. Some people's ability to speak languages ego is different than others, or ability to travel and get around the world's ego is bigger than others. All kinds of things, right? So all these things develop and go up and down throughout our lives depending on our different experiences. And something that I've come to recognize, or has come in over the last few days while I've been thinking about this, is as we age, I've noticed that folks who are older often tend to have less ego in general than maybe younger folks or middle-aged folks. And I wonder if this is just part and parcel to the simple passage of time in a human body on this planet. We age on this planet. Our bodies get older and slower and all the things that come with age. And I say on this planet because I'm just leaving room for other planets. Maybe other planets you don't age. Maybe you reach a certain level of maturity and stop aging in whatever body that planet comes with. Just throwing it out there. Like the elves in Lord of the Rings. And of course, I'm thinking about Lord of the Rings being in New Zealand, here in Middle Earth. Lovely. But this idea that we all go through ego deaths throughout the life cycle. And what am I getting at here? Why am I even talking about this? Why are we talking about this? Because the more our ego dies, I believe, the more we can embody our soul. Because that is that true, everlasting part of us anyway. The soul is always there. Your soul might not shine through 1,000% in every interaction on this planet because you're squeezed into this body. The soul is squeezed into this body, which is, as I've said before, probably like trying to stick a rainbow in a Coke can. But as we lose different aspects of our egos, as different parts of our personalities, not necessarily our personalities, but this pride we take in certain parts of our humanness, our lifetimes, our personality get destroyed, it just creates more space for you to be your true self, which is actually your soul, and spans all lifetimes, all timelines, all realities, all dimensions, all possibilities, everything, and not just this one. I'm trying to, what's the name of the different, you look at a comb and it has the different picks on it. I don't know what those words are, but it's not just one ring on the shower curtain. Your soul is the whole thing and everything else. Whereas your ego is just this one moment in time. So my new friends in different ways brought up this topic, and I was just so surprised because it's such a interesting kind of out there topic for everyday conversation that when it came up a few times right in a row, I obviously realized that it's something we needed to talk about on the show. But upon reflection, I've just been thinking about all the different ways that my ego has died and been destroyed over my lifetime, really. But I was just thinking about more recently. And then I'm trying to think of like, what other ego do I have? Like what qualifies as ego? I would say that a lot of times it's something that you're proud of. It's something that you're, happy that you have compared to other people, maybe. Maybe something that compares you to other people seems to be a theme. And highlight something that you happen to be good at or endowed with in this lifetime that other people might not have the same endowment. It seems to run along those types of lines, this ego thing. And I had a very real, in-your-face death of my intellectual ego within the last year. And I think that I've probably, since a fairly young age, had a form of intellectual ego. I could handle school. I handled college well. I got a fairly prominent award after college that enabled me to go study and do research in another country. And then I did grad school at, one of the top grad schools in that program, which also happens to be a quote unquote Ivy League school. And so I definitely had intellectual ego. Definitely. I don't feel like I flaunted it, but it was definitely there. And the interesting thing, it's different for everybody, but for me, I think I was just proud of myself for, being able to do that in this world, being able to go to these places and these schools and things. And so, yes, definitely had intellectual ego. Sure, it's not the only type of ego that I've had in this lifetime. I'm sure I've had many types of ego. I definitely have air hockey ego. So, there's that, and playing cribbage ego, and, other kinds of ego. So there are those things. But I had a really poignant destruction of my intellectual ego within the past 12 months when I applied to a PhD program in a school that wouldn't have even ranked in the top 50 in the country for the program that I was applying to. And I got rejected from that school. I haven't even shared this with probably most people in my life. But since we're talking about ego death, that completely destroyed my intellectual ego, which, by the way, is a really beautiful thing. I don't miss it. And the whole joke about the whole thing is that I had next to zero desire to actually go do a PhD program at this point in my life. I'm very happy with everything that I'm doing, and I'm very fulfilled and content with my life, and I think that I'm contributing, blah, 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 all of that. There was a very small part of me that wanted to do this, and the only reason I did it is because my guidance told me to apply to the program. So here I have my angels coming in and telling me to apply to this program. And how do I know that? Because I would have never thought of it. And if I did, I would have never thought of it for this particular school. And, when you get information from your guides or your angelic team, and then they just keep, and then as a acknowledgement, that thing will keep coming up in every area of your life, and you'll run into people and they'll say the thing, and they'll, you'll hear it on the radio or you'll see it on a billboard. All those things were happening. So in essence, my angelic teams set up this situation that was fairly involved, I might say. Fairly involved. In which I had to do work and write essays and things, right? And talk to people. And I always, if I'm doing something, I want to do it right. So I, go 100% and do the best that I can with anything like that. So I did. I spent all this time and energy and then got rejected from this school that wasn't even on my radar and wouldn't be on the radar of people looking to do a top program in this subject. And just like that, my intellectual ego was destroyed. And I'm at a point at this moment that I could recognize on some level what had happened and why that happened. And I'm really, really grateful for it, to be honest, now. I'm also really grateful to not have to do a PhD program at this point in my life. But I just wanted to share that because there is an aspect of embarrassment. There is an aspect of humility and being brought to your knees on some level, right? When something like this happens. And maybe you've experienced something like this, and maybe you haven't yet. But I think that it's safe to say that we will all experience or have ongoing experiences of ego death in this life throughout our time here. And I'm here to say that I think this is a good thing. And I think that the more that our human egos can shatter into 1,000 pieces, the more our souls can shine through this human vehicle, this human self. And the more that our soul can take over, as we've talked about in previous episodes, and really drive the vehicle and allow us to do what we need to do and be who we need to be in this lifetime. So that's all I wanted to say about that. I'm going to leave it there for today. Thank you, as always, so much for listening. Hey, if you're enjoying this, if you listen to this regularly, maybe consider writing us a really positive review on whatever podcast app you listen to. It actually does help. And I don't really care about numbers, but I do care that this reaches whoever needs to hear it. And maybe your positive review will help. I don't ask for it much, so if it hits you in a certain way, please do that. And as always, thank you for listening. Stay positive, stay safe, and stay meta.
The Let's Get Metaphysical podcast is an Up and Awaken production and is produced and hosted by Renata Maniaci. Our intention is to raise the vibration of the planet by sharing, validating, and normalizing spiritual and metaphysical experiences. If you are ready to raise your vibration, you might enjoy our free Let's Get Meta Master Clearing. To receive the Master Clearing or to learn more about the podcast, visit letsgetmeta.com. The Let's Get Meta podcast is inspired by angels and supported by angels. If you would like to be a patron angel to the podcast, visit patreon.com/letsgetmeta. Thank you for listening. Stay meta.
Let's get meta.
Metaphysical.
Let's get meta.
Metaphysical.
Let's get meta.
Metaphysical.
Let's get meta.
Metaphysical.
if you want to. Again, I'll leave it there. Thank you all so much for listening. Happy holiday season. And the next episode, I'll catch you in the new year. Be positive, be safe, and stay meta.